Hi there, welcome to the latest episode of my 10-minute moan. And the topic of this 10-minute moan is another crazy story where the SNP Scottish Government are giving £400,000 to Stonewall Scotland. Although, even though Stonewall Scotland are not active anymore in Scotland. This is just crazy. This just gives you... There's loads of people walking away from Stonewall. Right? Even the Scottish Parliament, believe it or not, stepped back from supporting Stonewall. But the Scottish Government, the SNP in other hands, still do, with their money, right? And they're doing absolutely nothing in Scotland. So I'm just going to read this story out to you that was covered in the Times this morning. And I'll give you my opinions at the end of it, but it's quite incredible. The SNP have been accused of funneling taxpayers' cash into propping up Stonewall, despite the charity apparently scrapping its Scottish operation. The Scottish Government has been urged to explain why it's continuing to back the LGBT organisation with rising six-figure annual grants after public-facing Scottish activity dwindled to next to nothing and key posts were unfulfilled. The charity says it has merged all individual roles into a more senior head of nations role and still has senior staff member overseeing work across Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Apparently. The Pride March Glasgow celebrated its 50th anniversary of Stonewall riots in New York in 2019. The SNP government has handed over more than £400,000 to Stonewall since 2025, after funding arrangements to run a programme aimed at advancing LGBTQ+ equality in Scotland. Under a binding contract, the cash was earmarked to help fund staffing costs to the equivalent of 3.75 full-time jobs. Now, if this is a binding contract and it's meant to be to supply 3.75, it's got to be legally binding in both directions. So if the jobs aren't there, then they've broke the contract, not the Scottish Government. And it should be actually quite easy to renege on it. However, despite Stonewall advertising for a Scottish director more than a year ago, the post appears not to have been filled permanently, and it's not clear that it any longer has any dedicated staff north of the border. Lucy Hunter-Blackburn, a former Scottish Government civil servant who was previously responsible for funding external organisations, said it appears that Stonewall Scotland had become a shell company and it was unclear why funding was continuing. Stonewall's dedicated staff appear to have dwindled to nothing, Hunter-Blackburn said. Stonewall Scotland social media accounts have been dormant for months, and the programme Scottish Government funding is meant to support appears, at first glance, to have little Scottish activity for some time. The Scottish Government has agreed to continue funding Stonewall into the next calendar year. Funding from Scottish as well as Welsh governments has become increasingly vital to Stonewall as other governments, both the UK and overseas, cut back on grants. According to its most recent accounts, the devolved administration now account for about half of Stonewall's overall government funding, excluding lottery cash. It was claimed in February that Stonewall could be forced to cut up to half its 114 staff. That's obviously UK-wide. As a result of funding cuts ordered by President Trump, the Global Equality Fund, administered by the US State Department, has given the organisation more than £500,000 during the past 3 years, before the President ordered a halt to the spending. The Scottish Government's funding for Stonewall comes on top of its significant backing for other LGBT groups, including £500,000 for LGBT Youth Scotland and £600,000 for the Equality Network. The organisations have been vocal in support to controversial SNP policies, such as Nicola Sturgeon's Gender Self-ID Bill, which blocked by the UK Government, and a proposed Scottish ban on conversion therapy shelved by John Swinney last year. Separately, the Scottish Government has also paid Stonewall to run training schemes and for membership of its controversial Diversity Champions membership scheme. Several high-profile organisations, including even the BBC, the Scottish Parliament, Equality and Human Rights Commission, Police Scotland and the Cabinet Office, have all pulled out of the Diversity Champions scheme over recent years. However, the Scottish Government has remained committed to the programme. Scots will ask serious questions as to why the SNP is squandering so much taxpayers' money still funding this organisation that has been mired in controversy. Tess White, equality spokesman for the Scottish Tories, said, I like Tess White, by the way, she's doing some good work up there. Keep your eye on that woman. Various public bodies, including the Scottish Parliament itself, as well as BBC, have pulled out of Stonewall-led schemes in recent years due to their hardline stance on gender ID. With the SNP still wedded to their gender policy, many will wonder if this money has been continued to shore up Stonewall's support for this agenda. I'll come back to that. Ministers must finally do the right thing and ditch this gender obsession, as well as stopping giving a six-figure sum to an organisation that doesn't appear to be active in Scotland. A spokesperson for the Scottish Government said, we are committed to supporting LGBTQI plus people, including through funding for Stonewall to advance equality to this group. This is particularly important at a time when we're seeing a rise in attacks against the LGBTQI plus community. See, when they say that, do they mean physical attacks or just people on Twitter saying enough's enough? Right? I kind of think it's the latter. Stonewall has worked in partnership with other LGBTQ plus organisations and partners in Scotland for 25 years, and we continue to do so. We support a significant number of workplaces in Scotland on their inclusion journey and have a proud record of supporting the Scottish Government on their policy and legislative ambitions. We hope that the introduction of a UK-wide fully inclusive conversion practice bill for all lesbian, gay and bi and trans people will be forthcoming in the next month. So, I think halfway through that story, we found the real reason for funding them. And this is something that's not unique to this particular question about transgender and gender rights, etc., and the gender recognition bill that the Scottish Government put forward previously. But this is something that's used a lot with the government, and I'm sure the same in Parliament. When they set up a committee to look at something, and they're putting bills through, etc., they always bring in what they call stakeholders. Now, these stakeholders, generally, you find, surprisingly, are government funded. NGOs, charities and such like, who receive big chunks of money, like this mob, from the Scottish Government. They then bring them into a room and they ask them questions about a bill they want passed. And guess what? Every time they do it, they agree with the government. And then the government do the wee tick box exercises and say, oh yeah, we use big buzzwords like stakeholders. And we say, stakeholders have agreed with this. And we've listened to all this input from stakeholders. They forget to tell us that the stakeholders are generally paid handsomely by the Scottish Government for other things. And it is a complete farce. And this whole funding of NGOs and charities needs under the bonnet and looked at. And I hope that the good people of Glasgow will vote for me next year, and I'll spend the next 5 years in Holyrood going under the bonnet and pulling out wee sweeties like this. Believe me. So, if you enjoyed the video or you want other people to see it, there's 3 things that drive the algorithm and make YouTube put it into other people's timelines. That is, click the like button, put some comments below and hit the share button. Doing one of those things, 2 of those things or 3 of those things will help greatly spread this video. If you've not already done so, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell. But the most important thing about, unless you are the type of person who gives our money to a body that do nothing in Scotland and who continually give money to quangos and NGOs and all this nonsense to become stakeholders to agree with their policy bills, then no you. But everyone else, have a great day. Cheerio, bye now.